Hello, and welcome to the Superhuman Graveyard. Today, I will be talking about Kinnikuman. I hope you will enjoy this video. Kinnikuman is a Japanese comic series created by the writer-artist team known as Yudetamago. Yudetamago is comprised of childhood friends Takashi Shimada, the writer, and Yoshinari Nakai, the artist. Kinnikuman began serialization in May of 1979 in Weekly Shonen Jump, a Japanese comics or manga magazine. Yudetamago continued to create Kinnikuman chapters to this day, and over the years the series has spawned games, animation, spin-offs, figures, and a variety of other collectibles and merchandise. I wanted to make this video because I have been a Kinnikuman fan for the majority of my life, and I would like to explain why I enjoy it so much and also share with you some of my favorite items from my own Kinnikuman collection. But first, to give some backstory and context, let us take a brief look at the beginnings of Kinnikuman and how it evolved into such an influential series in Japan. Kinnikuman started as a parody of the popular live-action superhero television show Ultraman, but eventually shifted its focus from superhuman comedy to superhuman wrestling. The story begins with Suguru of the Kinniku clan, an unpopular masked superhero who tries to protect Japan from alien threats. Suguru is not the best at superheroics initially, and his generally oafish behavior usually led to chaotic but humorous situations in these early chapters. Eventually, a wrestling tournament is introduced as a plot point, and the series begins to shape into its more recognizable superhuman wrestling form. However, wrestling references are found even in the beginning of the comic. Kinnikuman, as a primary wrestling-based tournament battle series, has very inventive characters and concepts. It created and refined a satisfying and addictive action formula that continues to this day. Not only in the current Kinnikuman chapters, but also in the way the series has influenced later manga by other creators. Though the series still retains some of the comical elements of its early form, particularly in the over-the-top designs for characters and their outlandish abilities, gradually the storylines became more consequential, intense, and dramatic, with high-stakes action that allows the reader to take these characters seriously, despite their bizarre appearances. Earlier, I said that the first serialized chapter of Kinnikuman was published in May of 1979, which is true. That chapter appeared in issue 544 of Weekly Shonen Jump. But Kinnikuman actually made two previous appearances in Weekly Shonen Jump in issues 524 and 535. The success of Kinnikuman's stories in these two issues is what led to Kinnikuman's serialization in the May 1979 issue. I do not own issues 524 or 535 of Weekly Shonen Jump, but these two pre-serialized chapters were reprinted in the 1999 manga volume Kinnikuman Tokumori, which I do own. I will now briefly show you a few panels from these two early non-canon stories, and then compare them to the first serialized chapter to illustrate a bit how the concept of Kinnikuman changed. In these two pre-serialized chapters, Suguru has a different backstory compared to his later serialized incarnation. In the first pre-serialized chapter, Suguru is stated to be the 8th Ultra Brother, which is a reference to the Ultra Brothers from Ultraman Ace, the 1972-73 installment of the Ultraman franchise. In this chapter, Suguru's difficult home life growing up is depicted, showing how the other Ultra Brothers bullied him. He eventually moves to planet Earth, and his life does not improve much there either. Even regular humans bully him, despite his superpowers. He tries to protect Earth from an alien threat, but instead causes inadvertent damage to some Defense Force planes, and is put in prison. In the second pre-serialized chapter, Suguru wishes to change his appearance so the people of Earth will like him more. His plan fails, but he almost seems to gain the Earth people's acceptance when he saves a revered temple from alien destruction. The people finally cheer him, and he is so happy he jumps for joy. Unfortunately, while celebrating, he ends up destroying the temple himself accidentally. The chapter ends with the humans yet again attacking Suguru. Basically, Suguru is presented in the pre-serialized chapters as a comical version of the down-on-his-luck superhero to an absurd degree. While these pre-serialized chapters focus a lot on Suguru's miserable circumstances, the later serialized version has a different origin story for him, and the comedy comes more from Suguru's antics. Now, let's take a look at Weekly Shonen Jump, issue 544. Here is the issue. My copy is not in the best condition. Besides being the first serialized appearance of Yudetamago's Kinnikuman comic, this is also the first time Kinnikuman appeared on the cover of Weekly Shonen Jump. You will notice that Suguru's mask is a bluish-green color here. The first couple of times he appears on the cover of a Shonen Jump magazine, his mask is this color rather than the later more well-known peach color. Kinnikuman's mask somewhat resembles that of a masked luchador's. For comparison, here is luchador m.u.s.c.l.e on the cover of a wrestling magazine from 1979, the same year as Chapter 1 of Kinnikuman. Suguru has a symbol on the front of his mask, just as there is an M symbol on the m.u.s.c.l.e mask. I will now flip through this issue of Shonen Jump for a bit to give some context on what kind of stories were being told in the magazine when Kinnikuman started. The lead-in story in this magazine issue is Chapter 2 of Shiritsu Kiwamemichi Koko by Akira Miyashita. This was Miyashita's debut manga, and it started the previous week in the magazine. This particular series, about a Yakuza training school, did not last very long, but Miyashita would eventually create his most well-known series, Sakigake Otokojuku, in 1985, which was also serialized in Shonen Jump. The majority of the comics during this era of Weekly Shonen Jump are sports-based. There are racing comics, tennis, baseball, etc. One particularly notable sports comic in the issue, though, is Rinne Kekuro, a highly influential series by Masami Kurumada. Rinne Kekuro is a boxing manga. Though the characters in Rinne Kekuro are considered people with no superhuman abilities, the comic has very dynamic depictions of these characters' special techniques. It would not be until 1996 that Kurumada's popular Saint Seiya would begin serialization in Shonen Jump. As you see, no Fist of the North Star, no Dr. Slump, no Dragon Ball, no JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as of yet. These manga would not begin in Weekly Shonen Jump for a few more years. Now, here is Chapter 1 of Kinnikuman. This image right here is a reference to Ultraman. An alien threat is advancing towards Earth, and the Earth Defense Force attempts to contact the Ultra Brothers and the American superheroes to help defend Earth. Unfortunately, the Ultra Brothers, who in this version are no longer related to Kinnikuman, are not available because they are currently on vacation at a hot springs. And as for the American superheroes, they all each have their own comical reason why they cannot help out either. Even though the comic is still not about wrestling in terms of the plot, there are still a lot of wrestling references in Chapter 1. For example, the Earth Defense Force members just start wrestling each other out of nowhere, shortly before they decide to contact Kinnikuman, or Suguru, to help save Earth. When Suguru arrives to be briefed about the mission, he wonders why the Earth Defense Force contacted him, and not one of the more popular superheroes. They lie and tell Suguru that the other superheroes can't make it to defend Earth on time because they are currently away on a superhero conference. This upsets Suguru, though, because it means he wasn't invited. Yet another wrestling reference occurs here, as Suguru, angry, performs the giant swing wrestling technique on the Defense Force chief. The Defense Force shows Suguru the alien monsters he will be going up against, and a few of them are based on pro wrestlers. After some funny training sequences, the time finally comes for Suguru to take on the aliens. The people of Earth do not have much confidence in Suguru's abilities and try to flee. By the end of the chapter, it turns out none of the aliens show up, because even they do not want to deal with a fool like Suguru. So, this first chapter still pokes fun at Suguru for being an unpopular superhero, but no terrible events befall him or Earth this time, and in fact, he saves the day by simply existing. As the series progresses, Suguru becomes a more competent superhero as he prevails against numerous opponents and hardships to become an endearing champion of justice. But I do not want to spoil too much about his journey. I recommend that you read it yourself if you have the time. Since I have mainly focused on Suguru so far, I would like to point out that besides him, many other interesting, memorable, and often iconic characters are introduced and appear throughout the story. Eventually, there are hundreds of chojin, or superhumans, involved in the plot, each with their own unique backstories, personalities, abilities, techniques, and many even with their own signature laughs. An element later borrowed by Eiichiro Oda's One Piece. Many of the chojins that appear in Kinnikuman were originally created and submitted to Yudetamago by fans. An example of a later manga that used fan-submitted designs like Kinnikuman was Nakaba Suzuki's Kongo Bancho. Though Suguru receives plenty of page or screen time as the main character, often he is not the main focus of the story. Kinnikuman becomes more of an ensemble cast comic, a similarity that many later shonen battle manga share. In 1983, Kinnikuman received a televised animated adaptation in Japan that lasted for many years. Animated movies were also made for the series. Another important part in the history of Kinnikuman is a particular form of merchandise, known as kinkeshi in Japan. Kinkeshi is short for Kinnikuman Keshi, and Keshi is short for Keshigomu. Keshi are generally small collectible figures that usually depict characters from a licensed property. For example, here are some of my JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Dragon Ball Keshis. Though there are many different Keshi types based on different comics or shows or games or other properties, Kinnikuman Keshigomu or Kinkeshi are probably the most enduring and widespread of all types. Kinkeshi were exported to the United States in 1985 under the name Muscle, with a harder rubber material for the figures. This was not the only Kinnikuman merchandise exported to the United States at the time. The Famicom Kinnikuman video game was localized in the US as well, also under the Muscle title. However, despite these localizations, the original Kinnikuman manga and anime were not released in the United States. It has been speculated that the Kinnikuman anime did not get released in the United States due to its violence, and also its depictions of some characters that might be considered culturally insensitive. The original Kinnikuman manga ended its run in Weekly Shonen Jump in 1987, after 387 chapters. Now, let us take a brief look at some of the manga Yudetamago created and worked on after Kinnikuman ended. One series Yudetamago worked on during and after Kinnikuman's serialization was Tatakai Ramen Man, which began in 1982 in Fresh Jump magazine. Tatakai Ramen Man is a martial arts action manga based on the popular Ramen Man character from Kinnikuman. Ramenman ended in late 1988, early 1989, and like Kinnikuman, received an animated television adaptation. In 1987, Yudetamago worked on Yurei Kozo ga Yate Kita, which lasted 5 volumes. This comic focused on yokai, creatures from Japanese folklore. In 1989, Yudetamago worked on the series Scrap Sandayu. This manga is of particular interest to Kinnikuman fans because a character from Kinnikuman, the cyborg Chojin Warsman, makes an appearance in Scrap Sandayu Volume 2. Warsman is one of my favorite Chojin, and he is known in Japan for his scary smile and bear claws, and has inspired similar characters in other manga. Yudetamago continued to work on martial arts action manga into the 90s. An example of one of these action comics is Lionheart, which began in 1993 and lasted 5 volumes. However, despite all these various attempts, none of Yudetamago's non-Kinnikuman related manga had as much success or longevity as Kinnikuman itself did. Yudetamago returned to Kinnikuman in 1996 with a chapter titled Muscle Returns, but this story was only a one-shot. A more permanent return to the world of Kinnikuman happened in 1998, when Kinnikuman Nisei began serialization in Weekly Playboy. Nisei is set years in the future from where the original series left off. Kinnikuman chapters have been in serialization ever since. The main character of Kinnikuman Nisei is Suguru's son Mantaro. Mantaro starts off with little interest in being a Justice Chojin wrestler, but he reluctantly takes on that role due to extreme circumstances. The original Justice Chojin from the first Kinnikuman series are much older by this point in the story, so a younger generation of superhumans in their prime are needed to stop the newest evil threats to planet Earth. In the beginning of the Nisei story, there are several character designs recycled from some of Yudetamago's previous manga that I mentioned earlier. This is not surprising, considering that these same characters were Kinnikuman fan submission designs from the original series to begin with. Kinnikuman Nisei received an animated television adaptation and 2 animated movies. The television series was localized and dubbed in the United States as Ultimate Muscle, and shown on the Fox Box programming block. Though the anime ended in Japan after 51 episodes, the English version did well enough for Toei to adapt more of the manga into a second anime series, initially aimed at the US audience. Though this second series was also released in Japan with a Japanese audio track. Because Nisei was not published in a Shonen magazine, which targets young boys, but instead published in an adult-oriented magazine, to appeal more to the younger audiences who would have been watching the anime, Yudetamago also published an alternate version of Nisei, under the title All Chojin Dai Shingeki in V-Jump magazine. This series lasted only 4 volumes, compared to Nisei's 29 volumes. The Nisei manga, which ran from 1998 to 2004, was also translated and published in the United States by Viz Media under the Ultimate Muscle title as part of their Shonen Jump Advanced line, from 2004 to 2011. One of my favorite storylines from the Nisei manga, the Demon Seed arc, never received an animated adaptation, but I will talk more about that storyline and other Nisei-related things in a future video. The story of Nisei continued into the Kinnikuman Nisei Ultimate Chojin Tag arc manga, which lasted 28 volumes and was serialized from 2004 to 2011. Unlike Nisei, however, Ultimate Chojin Tag has yet to receive an official English manga release or any television adaptation. Due to this, there is less merchandise available for Ultimate Chojin Tag. In my later Nisei video, I will elaborate more about Ultimate Chojin Tag. The main thing to note is that this series brought many of the old characters back into the spotlight in their younger forms via time travel, as they meet with the younger generation from Nisei. After Ultimate Chojin Tag finished in 2011, Yudetamago started work on another Kinnikuman manga series. This series is set shortly, a little over a year and some months, after the events of the original manga. The volume numbering of this manga continues from where the original series left off. I will release a more in-depth video about Kinnikuman's revival series later, so I will not say too much about it right now, except that it is a very enjoyable manga that is the culmination of the techniques Yudetamago has honed over the many years of their career. Since I will talk more about the storylines of Nisei and the 2011 revival series in future videos, for now I will focus a bit on Kinnikuman merchandise in this video. The resurrection of the original Kinnikuman series seems to be pretty successful, as evidenced by the greater volume of Kinnikuman merchandise released since this revival, despite there not being an animated television adaptation at the time of this video. While a good variety of Romondo action figures were released during Kinnikuman Nisei's run, which I will talk about later in my Nisei video, very little merchandise was released for the Ultimate Chojin Tag era, and even though Nisei did have its share of US merchandise and the Japanese Romondo toys, only a few Japanese kinkeshi based on the Nisei characters were released at the time. In contrast, Kinnikuman's revival series has also seen the resurrection of the kinkeshi line. Now, I would like to show you some interesting Kinnikuman merchandise. These packages are for the latest color kinkeshi I have ordered. Usually, kinkeshi are one solid color, but in this case, these are Kinkeshi Premium Color Sets Volumes 3 and 4, which you will see have color applied to multiple places on the figurine to emulate the characters' appearances on the manga volume covers. These two sets portray probably my favorite faction in the new Kinnikuman series, the Perfect Origin Chojin. I think Yudetamago did a really great job with these designs, and each one of them has elements of interest to me. Story-wise, I have my favorites out of this group, but I think the designs for all of them are really great. There are a couple reasons why I like Kinkeshi so much. One reason is they are small, so they do not take up much space, and also their sculpts are quite detailed for their size. But the main reason I enjoy them is because of the variety of chojin they depict. One of the most appealing things about Kinnikuman to me is all the different chojin or superhuman designs. I am always interested in seeing what new chojin design Yudetamago puts into the series, so it is neat to have a small figure of a unique and creative character, no matter how minor their role is in the story. Usually, when it comes to certain merchandise, you just get the main characters or the main villains, but with Kinkeshi, you will get even some characters that appear for just a few panels, if that. Now, the characters in these particular sets here are important characters, since these multicolor premium sets are reserved for the major characters or groups so far. But there are a lot of minor chojin with nice designs in the one-color sets alongside the major characters. Now I'm going to show close-ups of these kinkeshi to the side of this footage as I hold them up. I mentioned that these particular figures are of the Perfect Origin group. There are a couple different chojin groups, For example, there are the Justice Chojin, who protect Earth, and the Devil Chojin, who are usually bad guys. To sum up about Kinkeshi, besides being based on my favorite action manga, some other reasons I find them so appealing are the beautiful sculpting, the considerate small size of the figures, the charming creature or superhuman designs, and the wide selection of characters made. For anyone still watching this far, I hope there was some kind of interesting information in this video. I would like to make more Kinnikuman videos in the future, but with more specific subjects, rather than just a general overview like this one. But I figured I needed to start with the basics for this first video, just to give potential viewers a timeline of the Kinnikuman series. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.